Victoria Monroe stood in the center of her empty boutique, surrounded by the ghosts of better days. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air where customers used to browse. Her family's fashion house, Monroe Couture, had been a Manhattan staple for 40 years. Now it was 30 days away from closing forever. Her phone buzzed with another message from the bank. Victoria didn't need to read it to know what it said. The numbers had been clear for months. $200,000 in debt, dwindling inventory, and a lease she could no longer afford. Her father had built this business from nothing, pouring his heart and soul into every stitch and seam. Now he lay in a hospital bed uptown, his heart condition worsening by the day, unaware that his life's work was crumbling. Victoria pressed her palms against the antique counter her grandfather had imported from Paris. She was 28 years old, a graduate of the Fashion Institute of Technology, and she was about to lose everything. The boutique wasn't just a business. It was her family's story, their American dream, their proof that hard work and talent could create something beautiful and lasting. An unexpected visitor. The bell above the door chimed, and Victoria looked up, hoping for a customer but expecting another creditor. Instead, she found herself face to face with Julian Westmore. Everyone in New York knew who he was. His face graced business magazines and society pages with equal frequency. At 35, he had built a real estate empire that stretched from Manhattan to Dubai. He was handsome in that effortless way that came from good genes and better tailors, with dark hair that fell just so and gray eyes that seemed to see through every pretense. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and he moved through her shop with the confidence of someone who owned half the city. Victoria straightened her shoulders and smoothed her simple black dress. A Monroe never looked defeated, no matter how desperate the circumstances. "Miss Monroe," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "That depends on what you're here for," Victoria replied, keeping her tone professional despite the racing of her heart. "If you're looking for custom pieces, I'm afraid we're not taking new orders at the moment." Julian smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to devastating. "Actually, I'm here to discuss a business opportunity, one that could solve both of our problems." The impossible proposal Victoria led him to the small office in the back, her mind spinning with possibilities. A business opportunity from Julian Westmore could mean anything. An investment, a buyout, a partnership. She offered him tea, which he declined, and they sat across from each other at her cluttered desk. "I'll be direct," Julian began, leaning back in his chair. "I know about your financial situation. I know the bank is threatening foreclosure, and I know your father is ill. I also know that you're a talented designer with impeccable taste and a family reputation that still carries weight in certain circles." Victoria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Having her private struggles laid bare by a stranger was humiliating, but she forced herself to maintain composure. "If you're here to make a lowball offer for my inventory or my client list, you can save us both the time." "I'm here to offer you $250,000, Julian said calmly. "Enough to pay off your debts, cover your father's medical bills, and give you a fresh start. In return, I need you to be my wife for 2 years. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Your wife," she repeated slowly. "A contractual marriage," Julian clarified. "I'm in negotiations with a group of very traditional Japanese investors. They're interested in a major development project I'm proposing, but they place enormous value on family stability and traditional values. A married man with an established wife from a respected family would have a significant advantage in securing their trust and investment." Victoria stood and walked to the window, needing space to process what she was hearing. This couldn't be real. People didn't actually propose business marriages outside of romance novels and historical dramas. Yet Julian Westmore sat in her office, completely serious, offering her a lifeline wrapped in the most bizarre terms imaginable. The price of survival. "You're asking me to marry you," Victoria said, still facing the window. "To pretend to be your wife for 2 years. To lie to everyone, including these investors, about the nature of our relationship. I'm asking you to enter into a mutually beneficial arrangement, Julian corrected. You would live in a luxury apartment I provide, receive a monthly allowance of $10,000, and maintain full ownership of your boutique. After 2 years, we divorce quietly, and you walk away with enough financial security to rebuild your business properly. I get the investment I need, and when we part ways, neither of us is worse off than we started. Victoria turned to face him, searching his expression for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. His gray eyes met hers steadily, revealing nothing but calm certainty. "And what would this marriage actually involve?" she asked. "I assume you're not suggesting we live as a real married couple." "We would maintain the appearance of a marriage in public," Julian explained. "Attend events together, be photographed together, convince the world that we're a happily married couple. In private, we would live our own lives. Separate bedrooms, separate schedules, no expectations of intimacy or emotional involvement. This is a business transaction, Miss Monroe, nothing more." "Victoria," she said quietly, "if we're discussing marriage, even a fake one, you should call me Victoria." Something flickered across Julian's face, too quick for her to identify. "Victoria," he repeated, and the way he said her name sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. She thought of her father in his hospital bed, of the employees who would lose their jobs when the boutique closed, of the legacy that would disappear forever. She thought of the alternative, bankruptcy, failure, watching everything her family had built crumble to dust. This was insane. It was desperate. It was probably the worst decision she would ever make. "I want to see the contract," Victoria heard herself say. Every detail, every clause, every expectation spelled out clearly. "And I want my own lawyer to review it before I sign anything." Julian stood, extending his hand. "I wouldn't expect anything less. My lawyers will have everything ready by tomorrow afternoon. We can meet here to review the terms together." Victoria shook his hand, feeling the warmth and strength in his grip. For just a moment, their eyes locked, and she felt something pass between them. Something that had nothing to do with business contracts or financial arrangements. Then Julian released her hand and stepped back, the professional mask sliding firmly into place. "Until tomorrow, then, Victoria." After he left, Victoria sank into her chair and stared at his business card. Julian Westmore, CEO, Westmore Development Group. In elegant script below his name was a private phone number. She picked up her phone and called the one person who would understand the magnitude of what she was considering. "Olivia," she said when her best friend answered. "You're not going to believe what just happened. I think I'm about to marry a complete stranger." Victoria stood before the full-length mirror in a private suite at the Plaza Hotel, adjusting the delicate lace sleeves of her ivory dress. She had designed it herself in a sleepless haze over 3 nights, pouring all her confusion and fear into every stitch. The dress was simple but elegant, with a fitted bodice and a flowing skirt that fell just below her knees. It was beautiful, and it was a lie. Olivia stood behind her, fastening the pearl buttons that ran down the back. "You can still back out," her best friend whispered. "We can walk out of here right now, and nobody can force you to do this." Victoria met Olivia's worried gaze in the mirror. "And lose the boutique? Watch my father's heart break along with his health? I signed the contract, Liv. This is happening." The ceremony took place in a small chapel overlooking the East River, witnessed only by their lawyers and a professional photographer Julian had hired to document the occasion. The space was intimate and elegant, with afternoon light streaming through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the polished wooden pews. It should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like a carefully staged performance. Julian waited at the altar in a charcoal gray suit that made his eyes look like storm clouds. When Victoria walked down the short aisle, his expression shifted from professional composure to something she couldn't quite read. His gaze traveled over her dress, lingering on the intricate lacework she had spent hours perfecting, and for a moment, she saw genuine appreciation in his face. They stood facing each other, hands joined, reciting vows that felt both sacred and hollow. Julian's hands were warm and steady while hers trembled slightly. She wondered if he could feel her nervousness, if he knew that despite the contract and the logical reasons, Part of her felt like she was making the most enormous mistake of her life. "You may now kiss the bride," the officiant announced. Julian hesitated, his gray eyes searching hers as if asking permission. Victoria gave the smallest nod, and he leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When his lips met hers, she expected something brief and perfunctory, a kiss for the camera and nothing more. Instead, his mouth was soft and warm against hers, moving with a gentleness that surprised her. The kiss lingered, deepening just slightly, and Victoria felt heat bloom in her chest and spread through her entire body. Her eyes fluttered closed, and for just a moment she forgot about contracts and business arrangements. For just a moment, this felt achingly real. When they separated, both looked genuinely startled by the intensity of that simple touch. Julian's hand remained on her waist, his thumb unconsciously tracing small circles against the silk fabric of her dress. "For the photographer," he murmured, but his voice had gone rough around the edges. "Of course," Victoria whispered back, though her heart hammered against her ribs in a way that had nothing to do with business arrangements. Learning to pretend Julian had kept his word about everything. Victoria moved into a stunning apartment on the 42nd floor of a building in Tribeca, just 3 floors below his own penthouse. The space was modern and luxurious, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the Hudson River. He had even arranged for her furniture from the boutique storage to be moved in, including her grandmother's antique sewing machine. They fell into a careful routine over the following weeks. Victoria would rise early to work on new designs, often finding Julian already awake, drinking coffee in the building's shared rooftop garden. They would exchange polite conversation about their schedules, the weather, anything that didn't venture into truly personal territory. Then they would go their separate ways, living parallel lives that only intersected when required. But those intersections were becoming more frequent and more complicated. There were business dinners where Julian's hand would rest on the small of her back, guiding her through crowded restaurants. There were morning encounters in the elevator where they would stand too close, breathing the same air, hyper-aware of each other's presence. There were moments when their eyes would meet across a room and something unspoken would pass between them. Victoria found herself looking forward to these moments more than she wanted to admit. She noticed small things about Julian that the business world never saw. The way he always held doors open, not just for her but for everyone. How he remembered the names of every doorman, every server, every person others overlooked. The genuine warmth in his smile when he thought no one was watching. He wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was kind, thoughtful, and far more complicated than she had initially believed. The charity gala, their first major public appearance as husband and wife, came 6 weeks into their marriage. The annual Metropolitan Arts Gala was one of Manhattan's most prestigious events, where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen while ostensibly supporting the arts. Victoria spent hours preparing, choosing a stunning sapphire blue gown that complemented her dark hair and fair skin. The dress had a plunging neckline and a dramatic slit that showed just enough leg to be sophisticated rather than scandalous. When Julian arrived at her door to escort her, his reaction made all her effort worthwhile. He stood frozen in her doorway, his eyes widening as they traveled slowly over her appearance. "Victoria," he breathed, and there was nothing calculated or businesslike in his tone. "You look absolutely stunning." Heat rose in her cheeks. "Thank you. You're looking rather handsome yourself." It was an understatement. Julian wore a classic black tuxedo with an elegant simplicity that somehow made him more striking than any of the peacocking millionaires they would encounter tonight. At the gala, Julian kept her close, his hand possessively positioned on her waist as they navigated through the glittering crowd. He introduced her as "my wife," with a note of pride that seemed entirely genuine, and Victoria found herself leaning into his touch, enjoying the solid warmth of his body beside hers. They moved through the evening like a real couple, finishing each other's sentences, sharing knowing glances. creating an intimacy that felt less like performance and more like truth. The confrontation, Julian Westmore. As I live and breathe. The voice cut through their conversation with a prominent art collector like a knife through silk. How delightful to see you finally settled down. Victoria turned to find herself facing one of the most beautiful women she had ever seen. Catherine Ashford was tall and willowy, with platinum blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon and ice-blue eyes that assessed Victoria with calculating precision. She wore a red dress that clung to her perfect figure, and she looked at Julian with the familiarity of someone who had once known him intimately. Catherine. Julian's voice went flat, and his hand tightened almost imperceptibly on Victoria's waist. I wasn't aware you would be attending tonight. I'm on the planning committee, darling. You would have known if you still returned my calls. Catherine's smile was razor-sharp as she turned her attention fully to Victoria. And you must be the boutique owner. Victoria Monroe, is it? Or should I say Victoria Westmore now? Such a whirlwind romance. Julian always did appreciate a good business opportunity when he saw one. The implication hung in the air like poison. Victoria felt her face flush with humiliation and anger. But before she could formulate a response, Julian stepped partially in front of her, his body language protective and unmistakably territorial. My relationship with my wife is none of your concern, he said, his tone colder than Victoria had ever heard it. And if you're implying anything inappropriate about our marriage, I suggest you reconsider. Carefully. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, surprised by his vehemence. Her gaze flickered between them, and something like understanding crossed her features. My, she purred. Perhaps there's more to this arrangement than I thought. How fascinating. As Catherine walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor, Victoria felt herself trembling with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Julian turned to her immediately, his hands coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. Don't let her get to you, he said quietly, his gray eyes searching hers. Catherine is bitter and cruel, and nothing she says matters. She was your fiancée, Victoria whispered. You were going to marry her. I was going to make the biggest mistake of my life, Julian corrected. She wanted a husband who would be ruthless and cold, who would step on anyone to climb higher. When I refused to destroy a competitor's business just because I could, when I showed mercy instead of cruelty, she decided I was too weak for her ambitions. Leaving her was the best decision I ever made. Victoria looked up at him, seeing vulnerability in his expression that he usually kept hidden behind his professional mask. She's an idiot, she said firmly. Being kind doesn't make you weak. It makes you decent. Something shifted in Julian's eyes. He stood there, hands still cradling her face, and for a long moment the gala faded away. The music, the chatter, the glittering crowd all disappeared, until there was only the two of them, standing too close, breathing the same air, balanced on the edge of something that felt far more dangerous than any business contract. Victoria, he said softly, and the way he said her name made her heart stutter. The rooftop moment later that evening, after they had made all the necessary appearances and spoken to all the right people, Julian led Victoria out to the museum's rooftop terrace. The night air was cool and refreshing after the stuffy ballroom, and the city spread out below them in a glittering tapestry of lights and life. Victoria slipped off her heels with a sigh of relief, the cold stone pleasant against her aching feet. She walked to the edge of the terrace, leaning against the railing and looking out at the city she loved. Julian joined her, loosening his bow tie and rolling up his shirt sleeves in a gesture that felt intimate and unguarded. Thank you, Victoria said quietly, for defending me back there, for not letting Catherine make me feel small. You could never be small, Julian replied. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. When I walked into your boutique that day, I expected to find someone broken and desperate. Instead, I found someone who was fighting with everything she had to save what mattered to her. That takes courage. Victoria turned to look at him, surprised by the emotion in his voice. In the moonlight, his face was softer, more open than she had ever seen it. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Why did you really choose me? There must have been dozens of women who would have jumped at this arrangement. Women who are more sophisticated, better connected, more comfortable in your world. Why offer this deal to someone you had never even met?" Julian was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the distant lights of the city. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because when I researched you, when I watched you through the boutique window before I came inside that day, I saw something real. You weren't pretending to be someone you weren't. You weren't performing for anyone. You were just a woman fighting for her family's legacy with everything she had. And I thought that if I had to spend 2 years pretending to be married, I wanted it to be to someone genuine, someone who wouldn't try to change me or manipulate me, someone I could trust." "And can you?" Victoria asked. "Trust me?" Julian turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "More than I ever expected to trust anyone again." They stood there, inches apart, the night breeze carrying the distant sounds of the city. Victoria felt the pull between them like a physical force, drawing them closer. This wasn't part of the contract. This wasn't what they had agreed to. But as Julian's hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, as his fingers lingered against her cheek, Victoria realized that somewhere between the wedding that wasn't real and this moment under the stars, something had fundamentally changed. "We should go," Julian said, but he didn't move away. "It's getting late." "Yes," Victoria agreed, but she didn't step back either. The air between them crackled with unspoken possibilities, with feelings that neither of them were quite ready to name. Finally, Julian took her hand, threading his fingers through hers in a gesture that felt nothing like business and everything like a promise. As they rode the elevator down from the rooftop, hands still entwined, Victoria realized that the most dangerous part of this arrangement wasn't the potential scandal or the business complications. It was the very real possibility that she was falling in love with her fake husband. Victoria woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom windows and the unsettling realization that everything had changed. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from the gala. The way Julian had defended her against Catherine, the gentleness in his touch, the look in his eyes on the rooftop that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with something far more complicated. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Julian. "Good morning. Coffee on the rooftop in 20 minutes? Victoria's heart did an embarrassing flutter. They had shared morning coffee dozens of times, but this felt different. Everything felt different now. She pulled on comfortable, jeans and a soft cream sweater, leaving her hair loose around her shoulders. When she caught herself applying lipstick and then immediately wiping it off, worried about seeming too eager, she forced herself to stop. This was ridiculous. She was a grown woman, not a teenager with a crush, except that was exactly what this felt like. A crush that was growing into something much deeper and far more terrifying. Julian was already on the rooftop when she arrived, 2 steaming cups of coffee waiting on the small table between the lounge chairs. He wore dark jeans and a simple, gray sweater that made his eyes look like silver in the morning light. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it, and he looked up when she approached with an expression that was equal parts nervous and hopeful. "I wasn't sure you would come," he admitted. "Why wouldn't I?" Victoria settled into the chair beside him, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee cup. Julian was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant skyline. "Because last night complicated things, because the lines we drew so carefully are starting to blur, and I don't know if that's what you signed up for." Victoria's breath caught, so he felt it too. This wasn't just her imagination or wishful thinking. "Julian, I need to tell you something." And I need you to let me finish before you say anything." He turned to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. When I agreed. "To this arrangement, I thought I could keep it purely professional," Victoria began, choosing her words carefully. "I thought I could live this pretend life, play the role of your wife in public, and keep my heart completely separate. But somewhere between the wedding and last night, something shifted. I find myself looking forward to our morning coffee more than anything else in my day. I notice things about you that have nothing to do with our contract. The way you treat people with kindness, even when no one's watching. How your eyes crinkle at the corners when you really smile. The sound of your laugh when something genuinely amuses you." Julian's expression was unreadable, but his hands had tightened around his coffee cup. "I'm not asking you to feel the same way," Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength. "I'm not trying to change our agreement or manipulate you into something you don't want. But I can't keep pretending that this is just business anymore. Not to myself. So if you need me to move out, if you need more distance, if you want to end this arrangement early, I'll understand. But I won't lie about how I feel. Not anymore." The silence that followed felt endless. Victoria's heart pounded so hard she was certain Julian could hear it. She had laid herself completely bare, risking everything, and now she waited for him to respond. Julian set down his coffee cup and stood, walking to the edge of the rooftop. For a terrible moment, Victoria thought he was going to tell her she had crossed a line, that she had violated the terms of their agreement. Then he turned back to face her, and the raw emotion in his expression took her breath away. "Do you want to know the real reason I chose you?" he asked, his voice rough. "It wasn't just because you were genuine or because I could trust you. It was because when I saw you standing in that boutique, surrounded by the remnants of your family's dreams, fighting so hard to save something you loved, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, connection, a pull toward another person that had nothing to do with logic or strategy." He moved closer, and Victoria stood to meet him, her legs trembling slightly. "I told myself it was just attraction," Julian continued, "that it would fade once we started living this arrangement. But it didn't fade. It grew stronger every single day. Every morning I would wake up and think about seeing you. Every business meeting, I would find myself wondering what you were doing, if you were happy, if you needed anything. When Catherine implied that our marriage was just a transaction, I wanted to defend you not because it was good for our cover story, but because the thought of anyone disrespecting you made me furious." Victoria's eyes were burning with unshed tears. "Julian, I'm falling in love with you," he said simply, the words hanging in the air between them like a revelation. "Maybe I have been since the day we met. And it terrifies me because this was supposed to be simple. A business arrangement with clear boundaries and a defined ending. But nothing about the way I feel is simple anymore." Victoria closed the distance between them in 3 quick steps, her hands coming up to cup his face. "Then maybe we need a new arrangement," she whispered. "One that doesn't have an ending. One that's real." Julian's hands found her waist, pulling her closer. "Are you sure?" "Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to the way things were. This stops being pretend, and it becomes real. Messy and complicated and real." "I've never been more sure of anything," Victoria said, and then she kissed him. This kiss was nothing like the one at their wedding. That had been a spark, a preview, a hint of possibility. This was a wildfire. Julian's arms wrapped around her, crushing her against his chest as his mouth moved against hers with desperate intensity. Victoria's fingers tangled in his hair, and she felt years of loneliness and fear melting away under the heat of his touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "I don't want to wait 2 years," he said. "I don't want separate apartments and careful distance. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to come home to you every night. I want this to be real in every possible way." "Then make it real," Victoria whispered. "Choose me, not because of a contract or a business deal, but because you want to. Because I'm choosing you." The Japanese investors 3 days later. Victoria found herself standing beside Julian in a conference room on the 65th floor of his office building. Mr. Tanaka and his team of Japanese investors sat across the polished table, their expressions carefully neutral as they reviewed the final proposal for Julian's development project. This was the moment everything had been building toward. The reason for their arrangement, the business deal that had brought them together. Victoria wore a tailored navy dress that Julian had insisted on buying for her, and she felt his hand find hers under the table, their fingers interlacing in a gesture of support and solidarity. Mr. Tanaka looked up from the documents, his gaze moving between Julian and Victoria with careful assessment. "Mr. Westmore, we have reviewed your proposal thoroughly. Your business plan is solid, your financial projections are reasonable, and your track record speaks for itself." Julian's hand tightened slightly on Victoria's. "However," Mr. Tanaka continued, "what ultimately convinced us to move forward with this partnership has nothing to do with numbers or projections. It has to do with character. Throughout our negotiations, we have observed you both carefully. We have seen how you treat your employees, how you conduct yourselves in public, how you support each other." The older man smiled, a rare expression that transformed his stern features. "But most importantly, we have seen genuine love between you. In our culture, we believe that a man who honors his marriage will honor his business commitments. A man who treats his wife with respect and devotion will treat his partners the same way. You have both demonstrated these qualities consistently." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Mr. Tanaka had seen what they had been too afraid to acknowledge for weeks. The love between them wasn't an act anymore. It never really had been. "We would be honored to partner with Westmore Development Group," Mr. Tanaka concluded, extending his hand to Julian. "And we wish you both a lifetime of happiness together." After the investors left, after the lawyers finished processing paperwork, after the champagne had been opened and toasts had been made, Julian pulled Victoria into his private office and closed the door behind them. "We did it," she said, still slightly dazed by everything that had happened. "No," Julian corrected, pulling her into his arms. "We did so much more than that. We found something real in the middle of something fake. We found each other." 6 months later, Victoria stood in the newly renovated Monroe Couture boutique, watching as customers browsed through her latest collection. The space had been transformed, expanded into the adjacent storefront with Julian's help. Now it was twice the size, with elegant displays and a private fitting room for custom orders. Her father's health had improved dramatically once the financial stress had been lifted, and he visited the boutique weekly, beaming with pride at what his daughter had accomplished. But the boutique wasn't the biggest change in Victoria's life. She looked down at her left hand, where a stunning diamond ring now accompanied the simple wedding band from their contract ceremony. Julian had proposed properly 3 months ago, getting down on one knee in the same rooftop garden where they had shared so many morning coffees. This time, there had been no contracts, no lawyers, no business arrangements. Just a man asking the woman he loved to spend her life with him. They had renewed their vows in a small ceremony surrounded by family and friends. Grace had cried happy tears. Olivia had served as maid of honor, and Victoria's father had walked her down the aisle with tears streaming down his face. It had been everything their first wedding wasn't. Genuine, joyful, and filled with love. The bell above the boutique door chimed, and Victoria looked up to see Julian entering with 2 cups of coffee and that smile that still made her heart skip. He had started making it a habit to visit her during his lunch breaks, stealing an hour away from his empire to spend time with his wife. "Hello, Mrs. Westmore," he said, leaning in to kiss her softly. "Hello yourself, Mr. Westmore," she replied, accepting both the coffee and the kiss with equal pleasure. They stood together in the boutique, surrounded by the physical manifestation of her dreams, and Victoria marveled at how different her life was from that desperate morning when Julian had first walked through her door. She had thought she was entering a business arrangement, a necessary sacrifice to save her family's legacy. Instead, she had found her soulmate. "I love you," she said, looking up at her husband with wonder that hadn't faded despite months of marriage. "I love you too," Julian replied, pulling her close. "Best business decision I ever made." Victoria laughed and swatted his arm playfully. This stopped being a business decision a long time ago." "I know," he said, his eyes warm with affection and humor. "But I like to remind you that technically our love story started with a contract negotiation. How many couples can say that?" "Only the crazy ones," Victoria teased. "Then I'm grateful we're both a little crazy," Julian murmured against her hair. The real beginning? That evening, they returned to the penthouse apartment that had become their home. No more separate floors, no more careful distance. They had knocked down walls, both literal and figurative, creating a space that reflected their combined lives and shared future. Victoria changed out of her work clothes while Julian ordered dinner from their favorite Italian restaurant. She found him on the rooftop garden, the same place where so much of their relationship had unfolded, setting up their meal at the small table with candles and wine. "What's the occasion?" she asked, settling into her chair. "Do I need an occasion to have dinner with my beautiful wife?" Julian countered, pouring her a glass of wine. "No, but you have that look. The one that means you're planning something." Julian laughed, caught. "I was thinking about the future. About where we go from here." Victoria's heart skipped. They had talked about children eventually, about expanding both their families and their businesses. "And what did you conclude from all this thinking?" "That I want everything with you," Julian said simply. "I want Sunday mornings in bed and Tuesday night dinners. I want to watch you build your fashion empire and support you every step of the way. I want to argue about what color to paint the nursery someday and take family vacations to places we've never been. I want the whole messy, complicated, beautiful reality of building a life together." Tears welled in Victoria's eyes for the second time that day. "That sounds perfect." "I used to think love was a weakness," Julian admitted, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Something that made you vulnerable and irrational. Catherine reinforced that belief, making me think that caring too much was a flaw. But you taught me that love is actually the greatest strength. It's what gives life meaning. It's what makes everything else worthwhile." Victoria moved from her chair to sit in his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "You taught me something too. You taught me that asking for help isn't weakness, that accepting support doesn't diminish your achievements. You showed me that partnership means lifting each other up, not competing to see who can stand alone the longest." They sat together as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Below them, millions of people rushed through their lives, pursuing dreams and nursing heartbreaks, building futures and healing from pasts. But up here, in their private sanctuary above it all, Victoria and Julian had found something rare and precious. They had found a love that started as pretend and became more real than anything either of them had ever known. A love that had saved them both, not from financial ruin or business failure, but from loneliness and the belief that they had to face the world alone. "Thank you," Victoria whispered against Julian's neck. "For what?" "For walking into my boutique that day, for offering me an impossible deal, for giving me a reason to hope when I had none left, for falling in love with me even though it wasn't part of the plan." Julian tightened his arms around her. "Thank you for saying yes, for taking a chance on a stranger with a crazy proposal, for seeing past the billionaire facade to the man underneath, for loving me back." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they remained wrapped in each other's arms. Two people who had started as strangers bound by contract and became partners bound by love. Their story had begun with a business proposition, but it would continue as something far more valuable. It would continue as a testament to the unexpected ways that love can find us, even in the most unlikely circumstances, as proof that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as desperate choices and impossible arrangements. And as they sat together under the stars, planning their future and cherishing their present, both Victoria and Julian knew one truth with absolute certainty. Some contracts are made to be broken, but some loves are made to last forever. Their business arrangement had ended the moment their hearts became involved. Now they were writing a new contract together, one without expiration dates or exit clauses, one that promised nothing except the truth they had discovered together. That real love, when you're brave enough to reach for it, is worth every risk.